Have you ever been tailgated by another car? Actually, scratch that. Have you been tailgated today? Yeah, of course you have. It happens all the time, right? I had a memorable incident with a tailgater just last week. I was driving home on a winding stretch of a one-lane road when I saw a car quickly approaching in my rearview mirror. He was pushing me to go faster than the speed limit, taking every corner and curve as close to my bumper as he could. After about 5 miles of this craziness, we came to a stretch of road with a shoulder lane, which allowed him to finally zoom around me and go on his way. I was annoyed and mad, but just a few minutes later, I rounded a corner and saw that the driver had been pulled over by a police officer. Now, I can't lie. This guy stopped on the side of the road was a glorious sight. And why? Because he actually got what was coming for him, right? And how many times do we see someone driving crazy and think, there's never a police around to see these people? Well, that night, justice was served, and I practically pulled over and made popcorn to watch. And while it sounds petty to say it out loud, there's just something that feels good about seeing someone get what's coming to them. It's reassuring to know that sometimes what goes around comes around. And when someone gets what's coming to them, what we think they deserve, people often call that karma. Now, karma is generally a concept that appears in Eastern religions, and while we as Christians don't use the word karma, we know what it means, right? The idea is that good or bad, what someone does today will impact tomorrow. And while we may not actually believe in karma, I think a lot of us believe in the idea to some extent. We think that what we put out into the world will eventually come back to us in the end. Think about it. If you work hard in college, you'll eventually get a good job. If you make all the right decisions in your dating life, you'll end up with the spouse of your dreams. If you work hard at your job, you'll get promoted. But while all this sounds good in theory, we all know that unfortunately, that's not how the world works, because bad things still happen to good people. And if this idea of karma is real, it means that when we experience bad things, we just had it coming, right? We even apply this idea to our faith. We may not admit it, but as believers, we often think that if we follow Jesus and live for him, we'll have a relatively easy and happy life. Some of us go to church every week, read our Bibles every day, faithfully give our tithe, and frequently volunteer in our community because we think these actions will make God happy. And if we can make God happy, if we do the right things, he'll reward us. He'll see our efforts and good behavior and give us the desires of our hearts. But if we don't do all that stuff, well, then we'll be punished. We won't get the things that we want out of life. Our mistakes or mess ups now ultimately mean bad karma later. Now, I don't know about you, but this isn't the kind of God I want to serve. I don't want to serve a God who can be manipulated into giving me what I want if I do all the right things, who we can cut deals with through our prayers and behaviors, who dishes out punishment or withholds blessings because we make mistakes, who ultimately deals in karma. And here's a big thought. As Christians living in a karma-minded world, maybe we should stop and consider how this worldview is impacting the way we see God. Does this concept work by Jesus' standards? In the kingdom of God, do we always get what's coming to us? This mindset, a karma way of viewing life, has been around since the very beginning of life. In fact, a lot of religion in general is informed by this very idea, the belief that, one way or the other, everyone gets what's coming to them. When Jesus arrived in this world, a lot of people had that mindset. During his earthly ministry and his time on earth, Jesus did and said a lot of things that shook up people's preconceptions of God, themselves, and the way the world works. This was actually his MO. Take a belief that everyone assumes is true and then blow it up with some profound truths. To help people understand these truths, Jesus often told stories or parables that revealed who God is and the way his kingdom works. And today, we're going to look at one of those parables. Jesus starts one of them this way. For the kingdom of heaven is like the landowner who went out early one morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay the normal daily wage and sent them out to work. At 9 o'clock in the morning, he was passing through the marketplace and saw some people standing around doing nothing. So he hired them, telling them he would pay them whatever was right at the end of the day. So they went to work in the vineyard. At noon, and again at 3 o'clock, he did the same thing. At 5 o'clock that afternoon, he was in town again and saw more people standing around. He asked them, "Why haven't you been working today?" They replied, because no one hired us. The landowner told them, then go out and join the others in my vineyard. That evening, he told the foreman to call the workers in and pay them, beginning with the last workers first. When those hired at 5 o'clock were paid, each received a full day's wage. When those hired first came to get their pay, they assumed they would receive more, but they too were paid a day's wage. When they received their pay, they protested to the owner. Those people worked only 1 hour, and yet you've paid them just as much as you paid us who worked all day in the scorching heat. He answered one of them, friend, I haven't been unfair. Didn't you agree to work all day for the usual wage? Take your money and go. I wanted to pay this last worker the same as you. Is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Should you be jealous because I am kind to others? So those who are last now will be first then, and those who are first will be last. In this parable, the people who only worked in the evening got paid the same amount as the crew who worked all day. Now, I don't know about you, but at my job, this wouldn't fly. Can you imagine working for 8 hours only to have someone come in for the last hour and still make the same salary as you? You would be mad, right? By any standard, that would be unfair. And in Jesus' story, if karma was a real thing, the people who worked a short shift would have taken home next to nothing. So what's the point of the story? Well, remember what we said about parables. Jesus used them to teach people lessons about God and the way his kingdom worked. And that's exactly what he's doing here. With this simple story, Jesus is proposing a totally new way of living. He's challenging us to see things differently, to shake the karma from our system. Through his life and teachings, Jesus gives us a new standard of living. He sums it up here. Out of his fullness, we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Jesus' standard isn't karma. It isn't what goes around comes around. No, Jesus' standard is radically different. Instead of giving us what we deserve, he offers us grace and truth. Truth is something we can use to inform the choices we make. And this is important because every day we make decisions based on what we believe to be true. And that's why we need Jesus' standard, a version of truth that isn't skewed or changed by our circumstances, perspectives, or experiences. A version of truth that is just that, truth. And with that truth in our minds, we need the grace to live out that truth. Just like Jesus said, he came to give us both. The two go hand in hand. Now, grace can be a hard concept for us to grasp. In fact, the idea of karma can seem a lot clearer, right? It's easy to believe that we get what we deserve. Something about that just makes sense. It's fair. But grace plays by a different set of rules. Grace is when we get what we don't deserve, and we don't get what we do deserve. Here's what I know is true for each of us. At some point, we've all gotten what we deserved. And in that moment, we probably wished for a little more grace. Like the time you bombed an important meeting and begged your boss for a chance to try again. You were moved off the account. It was deserved, but even though you were the one who failed, you still hoped for some grace. Or maybe in a moment of stress, you said something that hurt your spouse. You look back on that with regret and wish they'd let it go. You wish they could give you a little bit of grace. Or maybe you really let someone down. Maybe your gossip found its way to the person you spoke about. You probably deserved a consequence, but in spite of that reality, you begged your friend to give you some grace to redeem. You see, grace goes against the way we naturally think. It's not about what we do or who we are. It's about what Jesus did and who he is. Because of him, we don't get what we deserve. Instead, he gives us what we don't deserve. He forgives us for things that even we have trouble forgiving ourselves for. He provides for us when we totally screw up. Jesus always looks at us through the lens of grace. If you think about it, we're all desperately seeking grace in this world. We want someone to love us when we don't deserve it. We want someone to be our friend when we've driven everyone else away. We want someone to stand by us when we do stupid things. We want grace. And the incredible news is that through Jesus, grace is available to everyone. Maybe you're not sure about this whole Christianity thing, and maybe the reason you aren't sure is because you don't think that you can measure up. You can't be what you think a Christian should be. You don't want one more thing to fail at in this life. If that's you, then what we're talking about today is a complete game changer. Because in a culture that judges and grades us on what we deserve, Jesus offers us something entirely different. He offers us grace, a standard that gives us what we don't deserve and makes sure we don't get what we do deserve. So, if that fear is what's holding you back from faith, maybe today's the day you can take a step toward the grace that God is offering. Or maybe you do believe, but you're struggling with a lot of guilt. You've made some mistakes and messed up big time. And even though you know the truth about grace, you're struggling to accept that God's grace is for you. Well, remember this. God's message is grace. And because of that, the mistake you made or the sin you committed isn't the end of the story. Grace is a place where you can start over. So today, maybe that's the step you need to take, to pray that God would give you the grace you need to start fresh. Or maybe you're just completely exhausted by this faith thing because you're constantly trying to get it right. You're spinning your wheels to make sure you stay in good standing with God, and it's leaving you completely worn out. Can I let you in on a little secret? At some point, you are going to mess up. You are going to make a mistake. And the good news is this: God's love isn't based on your performance. He doesn't need you to be good enough. He loves you right now, just as you are. Grace makes a way for that. So if you're struggling to experience His grace in your own life, take a moment today to ask God to help you receive His grace, to help you rest in it. No matter who you are or where you sit with this whole faith thing, remember this: His grace is available to every single one of us. So as we wrap up today, I want you to keep thinking about grace. What would it look like if you embraced God's standard for life? If you really believe that what goes around doesn't have to come back around? Because God offers us a different standard, one that is completely and totally unfair in the best possible way.